Okay.
Yay. Okay, so we had gotten to um where had we gotten to? Okay, so we read up to the process of assimilation. You good with starting there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'll start us off with 347. The process of formation is directly connected with the second process, the self-specifying process of the plant outwards. The seed germinates only when stimulated from outside, and in the process of formation, the direction into root and leaf is also a direction into the direction of earth and water, and that of light and air, into the absorption of water and its assimilation through the intermediation of leaf and bark and of light and air. The return into itself in which assimilation terminates does not have for result the self as inner subjective universality over against externality, does not result in self-feeling. Rather, is the plant drawn out of itself by light, by itself, which is external to it, and climbs towards it, ramifying into a plurality of individuals. Inwardly, the plant draws from light its specific energy and vigor, the immaterial quality of scent and flavor, the splendor and depth of color, and the compactness and robustness of shape. So cool. And this gets us into another long lesson in botany. The first couple sentences of which are basically the coincidence of the process outwards, with the first process being such that the process of root and leaf in their vital existence exists only as a process outwards. Wow. The only distinction between the two processes is partly that this outward turn side must become more definitely marked, but also and principally that the return into self as the becoming of the self, self-feeling, the satisfaction of the self from the overcoming of its inorganic nature, has here the peculiar form of being also a development outwards. The self present in the shape enters into the process outwards in order through the self-mediation to come to itself, to bring the self before the self, but the self does not authenticate itself. In the plant, this self-satisfaction does not become a union with self, but a fashioning of itself into a light plant. This takes the place of the senses. So what what I'm getting from this so far is that we're seeing the line between the inorganic, which is the basis of life, and the beginning of life that grows outside of that um, environment to be itself on its own. It's not self-contained and can't be. Like if you pulled a tree out of the ground, if you pull a plant out of the soil, right? The plant's going to die. Okay. So it still has a connection below as well as a connection above. And that's, I think, what he's trying to say here when he talks about um, the uh, uh, seed germinates, light and air. Yeah. The return into self in which assimilation terminates does not have for result the self as inner subjective universality over against externality. So basically, he's saying is the plant grows from the soil, reaches toward the sun, but it cannot, in essence, become an ent, become self regulating without, without the earth and water. It loses the earth and water, or it loses the light and air. On either of those sides, it dies. Uh, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
You're giving me the stink face, Kyle.
I'm still trying to making sure I grasp it. So that's all.
Yeah. So, like, you know how we're born into the world and eventually we wean from our mothers and
Hmm.
we can leave the nest. These plants can never leave the nest of earth and water. They are
Right.
always in earth and water, and they need light and air. We as animals need light and air, and we need water, but we can get water anywhere, right? The plant's water is always tied to the earth. It's always an external source of life. If it loses the earth and water as a source of life, it dies. We can exist separately from that, or I would argue in the grand scheme of things, we can't really. We're just as tied to the earth as the plant. It's just a matter of degrees. But Hegel here is drawing the distinction so he can draw a distinction between plants and animals so that we see that the closeness of the plant to the soil is closer than, say, we are.
Yeah. The inorganic part now makes perfect sense. Don't know why I didn't get that before.
Yeah, yeah. The inorganic part is the soil.
Yeah.
It's the soil, the earth and the water. And he spent a great deal of time in the previous sections outlining how the earth isn't actually a living thing. It's a setting for life, and so life grows on it. And he's he's building up he's building up everything from space all the way to living animals, and like um building up how they're all connected with each other at each stage. And uh, it's a very abstract concept. It's a very abstract thing to look at, say, the notion and the logic, and understand that it is a blend of being in essence, such that both being in essence as moments are in the notion, right? But it's really hard to picture it, right? But when you picture the plant embodying something in space and time that is connected to this inorganic environment, tied to it for its organic life, uh, you begin to see the moments more clearly because you can picture them as an external phenomenon. You know what I mean? Like soil has an external phenomenon. There's the soil. It's very easy to picture the soil. It's not as easy to picture the show or, you know, what do I want to say? Um, what's what's the culmination of being? It's like we talked about it last time. The immediate essential element that's a show of being, I think is what he says in the logic. You know what I mean? Or I think you do. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm just
Yeah.
tired myself. So
Yeah, same. Don't ask me how I read this page and was able to like piece that together. That's totally me. Like, yeah, I want to say getting lucky, but it's probably not that. I'm probably being stupid with that. So let's see. This closed circle of the outward turn process is annual, even though in other respects the plant as a tree is perennial, and the same is true not only of the opening of the flower bud, but also the parts and organs which are involved in the rest of the process, the roots and leaves. So he's starting to, yeah, he's starting to build up that not only is the inorganic giving birth to life in plant form, but this is a cyclical process to close circle. Uh, he goes through roots to die, fresh ones grow, older roots, blah, 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 the remain root. He goes on, more, more botany. External, okay. External nature with which the plant stands in relationship is not nature as individualized, but the elements. The plant enters into relation with light, air, and water, and so he's starting to systematize these relations with the inorganic and the organic. Um, and so with one, he says, while the process of the plant involved with the elements of air and water is general, the relation with light is displayed particularly in the opening of the flower bud. Blah, blah. Starts going through there. Um, Ooh, this is interesting. Just as a human being in his relationship to the state, which is his ethical, substantial nature, wow, his essence and the absolute power over him becomes in this very identity independent and for himself, a mature and substantial being, so too does the plant in its relationship with light give itself its particularity, its specific and robust quality. These aromatic plants grow, especially in southern latitudes, blah blah. Okay, so he goes back to the particular there, but it's interesting. The state gives man wings, so light gives plant or plants much the same. Is That's an interesting statement to make. Uh, Basically, our collectivity um, is is embodied in the state, whereas the plant's collectivity is uh, well, let's see. The specifying of air within the plant and the air process is manifested by the plant giving out the air again as a specific gas. So basically, exchange with the environment is number two. Blah blah blah. Transformation is brought about by oxygen, which is the negative self. However, the process doesn't stop here. It returns into carbon, the solid element, and conversely, the plant equally resolves this element by the opposite path into air and water. Um, that's your dinner, honey. If you don't want it, that's it. Uh, Link gives the following account of the process of the plant with the air. Okay. Okay, and it goes down. The organs of this process of the plant with the air. No, honey, that is your dinner. I'm not going to make another thing. I'm sorry. The organs of, sorry, open during the morning and closed in the heat of the midday sun. So he closes out the interchange between uh, the plant and the environment. Next to the air process, the water process is of cardinal importance with its moisture. Um,
So what was the first part? The earth and the air, now the water?
mhm. Well, this is interesting and undercuts what I said before a little bit. Most plants do not require soil for their nourishment. They can be planted in powdered glass or in pebbles, which remain unaffected by them. The plant gets on just as well with water, although if possible, it should contain an oily substance. Okay. All right.
There's things like
Yeah.
hydroponic gardening, which I don't know if that existed in this day or not.
Yeah. Hang on.
More just about botany and how they're able to grow plants in different soil, and how different soils also impact different plants. Hello. Hmm?
Hey, sorry. All right.
No worries.
Um, okay, so he got, so he's talking about the different processes, uh, air, water,
Yeah. Like also the type of soils and
sulfur.
whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah. And he talks about the different kinds of plants, some like sulfurous soil, some like uh chalky, some sand, that kind of thing. Um, the digestive life of the plant he talks about. So, so he goes through the whole thing. Um, and trees. So, okay, so at the end here, I think it's an interesting section. In general, the character of this process is not an endless growth outwards, but rather the plant takes hold of itself, returns into itself. The blossom itself is just the moment of return of being for self, although the plant can never really develop into a self. So he's talking about reproduction of the plant. The flower is this node, not the bud, which merely grows, but as this nodulation which arrests growth. It is the assemblages of leaves which are more delicately developed from the punctiform basis of the cellular tissue or from the first seed through the linear form of the woody fiber and the surface of the leaf. The plant has achieved in the flower and fruit the full rounded shape. The plurality of leaves is concentrated again into one point. As the shape which has raised itself into life, into the self, it is the flower, above all, which possesses color. Already in already in the calyx and still more in the flower, the merely neutral green takes on color. Also, the flower does not smell only when it is bruised, like the leaves of trees, but it gives out a scent. Finally, in the blossom, there occurs the differentiation into organs which have been compared to the genitals of the animal, and these are an image of the self generated in the plant itself, which brings itself into relationship with the self. So, reproduction, reproducing. And in some animals, that's even the case. You look at some monkeys and their butt is red. You know what I mean? Uh, um, the flower is the plant life which has clothed itself, which forms a garland round the seed as an inner product, whereas previously its activity was directed only outward. So, you know, there it is in a nutshell. The process of the plant's life cycle, um, given in a very um, an austere manner, at least in the main entry. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, 348, Kyle.
Okay. The plant also brings forth its light as its own self in the blossom, in which neutral color green is then further specified. The genus process, the relation of the individual self to the self, as a return to itself, arrests the growth of the plant as an unrestrained sprouting from bud to bud. The plant does not attain to a relationship between individuals as such, but only to a difference, whose sides are not at the same time in themselves wholly individuals, do not determine the whole individuality. Therefore, the difference too does not go beyond the beginning in an adumbration of the genus process. The germ is to be regarded here as one and the same individual, whose life runs through this process and through return to itself has not only advanced to the maturity of a seed, but equally has preserved itself. But this process is on the whole superfluous, since the process of formation and assimilation is itself already reproduction as production of fresh individuals. Yeah, we're just
Yeah.
it's a difference because people. Yeah, I feel like he's alluding to more. Is he alluding all the way back to logic, or is there or are there places in nature that we had this process to find? So I can't think of anything in between then and now.
Um,
It might even say in the edition.
so it part of me part of me wants to posit that life produces more of itself out of nothing. But we know that's not true. The conservation of mass and energy as a universal law says that whatever inorganic matter there is what is assimilated eventually into life. Okay. So when we see this reproduction process, we're seeing a process of reproduction that so like if you look at a rock does not reproduce itself. Okay. But um life does reproduce itself, but it doesn't do so just out of thin air like a magician. It takes, elements that were previously living and makes more life with it, or it takes previously inorganic objects. So, yeah. Um, so like when you think of thought in the logic, right? Or sort of unaided, experienced thought in the phenomenology, right? We're looking at structures that aren't, I want to say don't follow that schema, but I don't know. My train of thought kind of breaks down there. I know what you're trying to get at, but he's specifying something very he's talking about something very specific. In other words, life and nature itself. And yeah,
No, I'm just thinking just at the end, it's like the formation of simulation is itself already reproduction is production of fresh individuals.
right.
Because I know the concept of reproduction was founded upon before. Now we're in the physical world where it's actually happening.
Yeah. Let's see here.
Schilling says,
The fertilization of the plant consists solely in this, that the plant endows its moments with an abstract existence in which they exist separately and posits them as a unity again through contact. This movement as a movement between abstract differentiated activated but existent moments is the plant's actualization of these abstractions, a process which it displays within itself. Okay. All right. Um yeah,
oh,
and so
yeah,
he's talking about plant reproduction
yeah,
basically.
which is different than animal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that this is under the heading the genus process makes sense because the genus is reproducing itself at that level of abstraction. And here's the process that goes into how plants mate, et cetera, et cetera. More
Of
botany.
course, I don't know. There's pollen. Okay.
Yeah. The plant and he says at the top 345, the plant therefore is asexual, because the sexual parts form a closed particular circle apart from their individuality. And he goes on to be very, very specific about that. Uh, Sexual organs,
Copulation, as we consider it, even occurs. Yeah.
right. Now through this though this compels us to admit the occurrence of an actual fertilization, it still remains the first question whether it is necessary, since buds are complete individuals and plants propagate themselves by stolones, and leaves and branches need only come into contact with the earth in order to be themselves. It follows that the production of a new individual through the union of the two sexes is a play, a luxurious superfluity propagation, for the preservation of the plant is itself only a multiplication of itself. This is an interesting question. But the fact is that the reproduction of the next generation, I would argue, is hardwired into the circuitry of everything from an amoeba all the way up to us. And so to ask the question, well, with the plant, is it even necessary? It doesn't matter if it's necessary. Well, it's necessarily part of the hardware.
Just contingent on which plants do what. But the genus as a whole, yeah, it's more necessary by definition of it being a genus. Right?
I don't know.
I was saying the definition of a genus means that there's going to be a reproduction process.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big question in biology. Why does sexual reproduction exist?
Yep.
And that wasn't really understood in Hegel's day.
Yeah, I think the
It
closest answer I've seen to
applied development theory of evolution and development of genetics.
yeah, exactly.
Well, here's the I want to say Darwin had something to say about this, because if you're a plant, you're not just existing in a vacuum. You're interacting with other things, and other things take pieces of you and cart them off,
Yeah.
or like bees pollinate, right? The bees and the flowers are in a symbiotic relationship, okay? And for example, right? So if you ask the question if a plant by itself, with nothing else in consideration, needs sexual uh, reproduction for fertilization, I mean, the picture's incomplete. It's one-sided. You're never going to find a plant outside of the rest of nature that includes what aids that. And maybe he talks about this down here. Blah blah blah. The genus process is formal. It is only in the animal organism that the process has its true meaning. Whereas in the genus process of the animal, the genus as the negative power law realized, blah blah blah. Strictly speaking, the sex relationship should be regarded as just as much or even more a digestive process. What? Okay.
yeah, it's still that question.
But the reason why only the negation is necessary in the plant is that the affirmative identity of the individuality of the germ is already everywhere present in principle in the plant itself, for the plant's identity is original. Uh, hmm. I'm not smart enough to make very many comments about this.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with biology at this level. At this
Yeah.
been a long time.
Wow. Okay, the result of this destructive process is the formation of the fruit, a bud which is not immediate, but is posited by the developed process, whereas the earlier bud is only the formal repetition of the whole. The fruit, however, is expressly the production of a seed. Consequently, in the fruit, the plant achieves its consummation. So basically, I think what he's trying to get at with some of this is as you're looking at the different pieces of the plant and its different processes as it moves from seed to whole plant to dead, right? If you look at it anywhere along that linear path, it's not, without looking at the whole, it's not entirely apparent whether sexual reproduction is even necessary. When you look at the whole plant, you realize it is. But looking at it prior to that whole, looking at it, as you piece together logically the parts in the process that put it together,
Just seeing what he was.
like being it fall, the like being the necessity of say sexual production falls apart. Once you see the whole and its interaction with the rest of nature, then you see, well, duh, it is not only necessary but vital for its continued. I mean, because we know from news reports, if the bees are all dead, plant species will be wiped out that rely on that fertilization. So we know from scientific report and testing that that is indeed the case. This is a logical uh, examination of nature, and you know, as you go through, what becomes apparent through the apprehension of the whole is not necessarily totally sensible when you're looking at the parts. That's what I mean. It's kind of like the liver. If you just take out the liver and look at it and you say, this is a human liver and it does this for the human. Well, if it's apart from the human, it's not, completely apparent what it does in the process of being part of the human. And I think that's where he's going with this question of sexual reproduction in plants when you can just make a cutting, but or the tree falls in the forest.
With having the new plants will be genetically identical with the original, whereas sexual reproduction, you're always mixing genetic information,
Yeah.
and that is essential, for say the plant or any organism to remain adapted to its environment over time.
Oh, this is interesting. The seed is the digestive plant, and in the fruit, the plant demonstrates that it has brought forth its own organic nature from itself by itself, whereas in many plants which have no seeds, the preservation of the genus is not affected in this way, but the genus process has already coincided with the process of the individuality. So a cutting, basically, will do in some cases, whereas this, yeah. And it talks about the fruit, blah blah blah, how the seed gets
Well, the
out.
fruit, fruits. One of the functions of fruit is that animals eat fruit, and by eating fruit, they scatter seeds around.
Yeah. Promote and hasten ripening. Yeah. Yeah. So basically nature is a whole network of levels of um development, and some levels of development feed higher levels of development and so forth and feedback on each other. You know, the bird eats the seed, but also the bird preserves the plant by eating the fruit, so on and so forth. Same with pollination. I don't know what an anther is. I should look that up. He keeps talking about anthers. a separate manifestation in the anthers. Okay. All right. So breaking past that, 349. But what has been posited in the notion is that the process displays the return into itself of the individuality and shows that the parts, which in the first instance are individuals, belong also to the mediation and are transient moments in it, and consequently that the immediate singularity and externality of plant life are sublated. This moment of negative determination is the basis for the transition to the veritable organism in which the outer formation accords with the notion, so that the parts are essentially members and subjectivity exists as the one which pervades the whole. And, we dial all the way back to the phenomenology where regularly he goes back and talks about the plant. The bud disappears in the bursting forth of the blossom, and one might say that the former is refuted by the latter. Similarly, when the fruit appears, the blossom is shown up in its turn as a false manifestation of the plant, and the fruit now emerges as the truth of it instead. These forms are not just distinguished from one another, they also supplant one another as mutually incompatible, yet at the same time, their fluid nature makes them moments of an organic unity in which they not only do not conflict, but in which each is as necessary. Remember is sexual reproduction in plants necessary? As the other, and this mutual necessity alone constitutes the life of the whole. And that's point 2 in the phenomenology. Fast forward all the way to 349, and he's basically restating that. I get, yeah, in a different mode here in 349. You know what I mean? It's very interesting. Yeah. The plant, yeah, and he oh wow. Okay, this is a shorter Zusatz. You want to read that, Kyle?
Plant is a subordinate organism whose destiny is to sacrifice itself to the higher organism and to be consumed by it. In the same way, the light is the plant's color is a being for other, and the plant in its airy form is an odor for other. So the fruit, as etheric oil, concentrates itself into this combustible salt of sugar and becomes a fermented liquid. The plant now reveals itself here as the notion which has materialized the light principle and has converted the watery material into a fiery one. The what the exact term, but the process it uses to generate sugar from light,
Yeah.
and proceeds to ferment. The plant is itself the movement of the fire nature within itself. It proceeds to ferment, but the heat which it gives out from itself is not its blood, but its destruction. The animal process, which is higher than that one of the plant, is its ruin. Now, since the stage of flower life is only a relationship to another, whereas life consists in being self-related to its self-distinguishing, this contact with the flower, whereby it becomes for itself, is its death, for it is no longer the principle of the plant. The contact is its positing of the individual, of the singular, as identical with the universal. But the singular is thereby degraded to being no longer immediately for itself, but only through negation of its immediacy. But thus it is raised into the genus which now comes into existence in it. With this, however, we have reached a higher notion of the animal organism.
Yeah. So we've reached the all important line between plant and animal and the relation between the two. And it's interesting. It's interesting how he talks about the the fiery nature. So if you burn anything, of course, it returns to its constituent elements, or well, I mean, it turns into like a base element, like carbon, right? But it's still what you burned. It just realigned into just the single element. The smoke it gave off, the ashes that it produced, basically the destruction. So if an animal eats the fruit or even the whole plant, right? It literally burns and turns into an element used by animals. And that's kind of what he's getting at here with the process. The line between plant and animal is sort of materially like if you were trying to turn one into the other and constitute what the animal exists because of. He's basically telling you that the plant is necessary for the animal to not only sustain itself as they are, but also most probably, you know, there have been plants that have sort of climbed the ecological ladder into animalhood, I'm guessing as well. You know what I mean? Um, I can't think of one that rides that line. Can you? Maybe like a pitcher plant that eats animals and reproduces itself.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of plants at all that we move that I can even think of.
Well, like a Venus flytrap.
I mean, like, is they untethered from the earth, actually?
Oh, well, yeah, I,
Moss, kind of. That's on stone.
I don't think you're gonna, yeah, I don't think you're gonna find a plant like an ant that can walk away from its soil and do what it does and still do what it does. I think at a certain point, like fish that come out of the water and become animal, right? Um, you know what I'm talking about. Like we all remember the nature books that showed the fish starting to walk onto land on weird feet. You know what I mean? So, um, going from strictly plant into the animal kingdom, I think the closest thing to that are probably ants or bees themselves, like we talked about before. Because if an ant dies, I mean, it's almost a collective. It's almost closer to a collective being, such as
Yep.
plants are, than they are to say individualized animals. But we see them as closer to animals because they seem self-contained when they're really not. You know what I mean? Like if there's an individual ant, but let's say it doesn't have a chemical path to follow back to the hive, it'll just go around in circles until it dies, you know, almost like it's got a circuit loose. Well, it does. It lives on that circuit of oil or
Pheromones.
yeah, pheromones that leads it places, right? Um, yeah, ants are closer to plants than actual animals, but we treat them like animals because they seem individual. There you go. All right. I had to marinate that thought a little bit in saying it.
The Wilbur used to say that like an ant colony or a bee colony can be viewed as a single organism.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to start reading this 350 because I'm interested in how he sort of opens this up. The animal organism, the organic individuality exists as subjectivity insofar as the externality proper to its shape is idealized into members, and the organism in its process outwards preserves inwardly the unity of the self. This is the animal nature which in the actuality and externality of immediate singularity is equally, on the other hand, the inwardly reflected self of singularity, inwardly present subjective universality. Now he has created a whole bunch on this introduction paragraph. So what does he mean in the Zusatz? I hope I hope they took notes for God's sake. In the animal life, light has found itself for the animal arrests its relationship to another. It is the self which is for the self, the existing unity of distinct moments which are pervaded by it. The goal of the plant's development is to become for itself, but it does not transcend the stage of two independently existing individuals, such that the plant itself and the bud, which are not in the form of ideal moments, these two posited in a unity. See, in the plant, the bud and the plant are linearly connected by time, and one supplants the other. If you take the bud and the plant in a unity that both exist at the same time, do not temporally have to supplant each other, that's the animal. That's what he's saying. So both are there, right? The animal organism is therefore this duplication of subjectivity, which no longer, as in the plant, exists as duplicated, but only as the unity of this duplication. There thus exists in the animal the veritable subjective unity, a unitary soul, the immanent infinitude of form which is set forth in the externality of the body. And this soul, in turn, stands in relation with an inorganic nature, with an outer world. Okay, yes, animal, outer world, check. But the subjectivity of the animal... Hi, sweetie. Drink your milk. Tomorrow's Tuesday.
9:15 we have
9:15, we have swimming.
lesson.
Yes.
Kick.
That's right. Kick. Can you finish your beef? Can you go finish your beef, please? Okay. Yeah, beef rice. The life of the animal as this highest point of nature is thus the absolute idealism of possessing within itself the determinateness of its bodily nature in a perfectly fluid form. The incorporation of the immediate into the subject and its possession is incorporated. So basically, he's talking about the concept of the animal form. Here, therefore, heaviness is first truly overcome. The center has become a filled center, which is itself for fulcrum and first as such as a truly self-subsistent center. In the solar system, we have the sun and other members which have an independent existence and are related to each other, not according to their physical nature, but only according to the nature of space and time. Now, if the animal organism too is a sun, then in the stars are related to each other according to their physical nature and are taken back into the sun, which holds them within itself in one individuality. Okay, all right. A sun is related to the stars as it is one of them. The animal is the existent idea insofar as its members are purely and simply moments of the form, perpetually negating their independence and bringing themselves back into their unity, which is the reality of the notion and is for the notion. If a finger is cut off, it is no longer a finger, but a process of chemical decomposition sets in. In the animal, the fully achieved unity is for the implicit unity, and this latter is the soul, the notion which is present in the body, insofar as this is the process of idealization. The asunderness of spatial existence has no truth for the soul, which is unitary, finer than a point. People have been at pains to find the soul, but this is a contradiction. There are millions of points in which the soul is everywhere present, and yet it is not at any one point, simply because the asunderness of space has no truth for it. This is interesting. Wow. Yeah. The point of subjectivity is to be adhered to. The others are only predicates of life, but the subjectivity is not yet for itself as pure universal subjectivity. It is not aware of itself in thought, but only in feeling and intuition. So he's talking about the difference between humans and animals here. It is not aware of itself in thought, but only in feeling and intuition. That is to say, it is only reflected into itself in the individual, which reduced to a simple determinateness is posited as ideal. It is objective to itself only in a specific particular state and is the negation of any such determinateness, but does not transcend it in the same way that sensual man can indulge every appetite, but not get beyond it in order to grasp himself and thought as universal. That's interesting. Like he walks right, or the notes, maybe not Hegel exactly, but the notes in Hegel's class walks right up to the difference between sort of material mechanical existence of even man and the thoughts that he produces that allows him to grasp his man's existence as a universal um, that can transcend just sort of that sensual individualized state. So he walks right up to the line between uh you know being an animal and being able to think big thoughts, I guess you could say.
Although, because we say at this point there are animals in between us, and at some point where there's degrees of that too.
Yeah. It's something I asked Harrison about a few years ago, and he basically said, look, Hegel, um, Hegel delineates the line between animal and human in terms of what we have access to. We have access to human thought. There may be animal thought that transcends the instinctual, but we can't account for it. We can't give it a determinate shape because
Not
we
yet.
do not experience dolphin,
Well, correct.
dolphin brain making thoughts. You know what I mean?
We barely even able to see the syntax of their own language at the moment.
Now, we have talked to apes,
Yeah,
so we know animals have that level of complexity, but our ability to make it a science,
it's in process. Yeah.
it's well, I would say we are still in the Stone Age as far as being able
yeah.
to tap into what those experiences would be like as if you were a tree frog or as if you were an ape. You know, some of the animals we can talk to because we have figured out, you know, workarounds and the differences between our genuses. But in terms of incorporating those scientific speculations into a work such as this, I I'd be hard pressed to even speculate on where you would put it in such a philosophical system. It's probably easier than I think, honestly. But I can't think of where it would go. Um, well,
Yeah.
if you consider that nature, let's put it this way, if you consider that humans interact with nature itself, and he talks about the the interaction of humans with nature um throughout this text, you kind of get the flavor of the fact that you would probably put it as sub paragraphs under the animal organism, um, or possibly have an outgrowth into the spirit of dolphins, right? Because you have the philosophy of spirit. Okay, philosophy of spirit gives you the scientific breakdown of
Dang.
the process of spirit in being self-possessed in action and thought and so on and so forth, right? um I don't know, I'm just speculating here. Haha. I've gone beyond dialectics
You're doing
to
the speculative
speculation.
method.
Yeah, but a different speculative. um I'm doing a speculation of the understanding. is
Yeah.
probably what he would tell me. You're using scientific method, sir. Yeah, but that doesn't go beyond the understanding. And so, yeah, good luck to you. Well, no, he wouldn't be flippant about it. He would say, "Good work. Now systematize it," which is indeed what he says throughout all of his texts, which is, exactly what Marx did. Marx said in the I'll close this out. Marx said in the um, what is it? The British Museum Library,
Yeah.
and he collected up scientifically gathered info, and then he systematized it into Capital, among other writings. And then he died. If there was one man I wish had been given immortality, that would be the guy. Unfortunately, we only got him for what, 50 or 60 years? Probably more than that, actually. But he had carbuncles all the way.
Well, he lived to be 64, almost 65.
Okay.
Engels lived to 75, so.
Yeah. Well, uh, I I know this is totally tangential, but through studying Hegel, I've come to understand why he thought that revising and re-revising Capital Volume 1 was more important than publishing Volume 2 and 3. Volume 1 with its opening and uh, method, I think was key to the rest. You know, you have the opening with the commodity as the key to the rest of the system and make it as intelligible to the layman as possible. You could read the rest as notes and get it. And indeed, even I mean, Engels was at least able to publish the other two in his lifetime.
And those 11 notes that Koski put together later on. Theories of surplus value.
Yeah. Yeah. But without the key, this continues to remain my central point on capital, is that without the key that's in volume 1, not only in the first chapter but the subsequent like delineation of forms, I guess you could say, like the rest of the text is well, basically
Commentary.
not as understandable. I mean, if you look at the way Engels organized volumes 2 and 3, you notice that it constantly refers back to volume 1 and volume 1's basic forms as moments of those later forms in circulation and distribution and concrete manifestations like rent, land rent and wages and so on and so forth. Like you can't understand land rent without getting, a basis for what the commodity system is and what it does, how it injects itself into every area of life, even ones that are starting to decay, like the feudal land rent system was the decaying form in which capital planted its seed, and so on and so forth. And again, we're getting into the plant metaphors here. They you start to see how the connection with the non-organic with the organic in terms of conceptual development. Like you mentioned that earlier, Kyle. Like how do you connect the life of the plant with earlier forms of thought and how they're dialectically organized? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like what's the well, the glib answer is that everything everything is properly understood scientifically through this prism. Um, or you could say that, all existence is dialectic, or it's nothing. Um, but that doesn't really get to the, you know, I mean, what I just did by comparing, um, what did I just do? I just compared plants to feudalism and capitalism to the animal organism, right? A little bit there, and someone's gonna and someone's gonna come along and say, no, that's not a good way to put that. But that's exactly logically how Hegel organizes this encyclopedia. Um, the the there are certain writers like Ellen Wood who say that the conventional Marxist writers on development for feudalism to capitalism, including probably Marx, were wrong to assume that capitalism was going to grow out of feudalism. The problem with that argument is that when you're looking at the historical development of capitalism from feudalism, you're already working with the finished product, the whole. So if you're looking at nature, right? Nature is in its whole is all the way at the end of this book, right? And all the way at the beginning is space, right? And so if you look at Hegel's book and you say something asinine like, it's a uh, it's a bad uh, yeah, yeah. Ellen Wood was anti-dialectic, anti-Hegelian. That's the only way I can read it. Because
Music to start playing on me.
what's that? What'd you say?
For some reason, I've got music playing. I don't know why. Give me a second.
Yeah. I've had trouble with my internet too. It's weird.
I figured out what it is. I got some test running, and so I'd start testing the radio stream on me.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Ellen Wood says that uh, that conventional Marxist writers on the history of development take for granted that capital is going to develop from feudalism. What she misses in that, I think, is that when we're looking at the history of development, we're looking at a whole that has already been there. It's already happened, right? So, um, you're not necessarily just looking for causes and effects. I'm tired, guys. My brain has said do 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 do. So, but I think you know what I mean. A little
Yeah.
bit with that. Certain analyses of history that try to pretend that capitalism as such did not develop out of feudalism. Uh, as sort of a starting argument. And I know that's not exactly what she says, but it's kind of where you're led, though. You know what I mean? And I think she says it for the sole purpose of saying, no, your analysis is not of capitalism developing out of feudalism is wrong. Mine is right. Is to differentiate her publishing from other people. I don't know. Maybe that's um
Well,
maybe that's a little cynical.
the whole debate over transition from feudalism to capitalism. People like Paul Sweezy and Maurice Dobb, have very distinct positions on how that worked. So I think she was asked. So I think someone like Ellen Wood was noting off the earlier debates from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah. All right, folks. All right. So I'm going to say we should read from 352 to hmm. Let's go from 352. Whoa. Holy shit. Hang on. Might have to back up. Yeah, I'm going to have to back up. Sorry. So let's go from 352 to 359 and make sure and read the systems of shape as well, just to kind of get the flavor. Actually, no, to 360. So 352 to 360. Right up to the Zusatz, because the Zusatz is going to delineate all of this, structure. From basically, yeah. Okay. All right. I'm exhausted, so I'm gonna sign off. Comrades, you have a great night.
You too.